We got to stop calling this the Brian Flores draft because that's not what it's really about. It's more about roster reality, cap allocation, and where the team actually needs help. And today, I'm breaking down the full picture, draft narratives, GM search, and yeah, we're going to talk about pending free agents also. So let's dive into it. Now, the draft narrative, right? There's a lot of people out there talking about this is the Brian Flores draft. But let's reset the conversation and let's look at the numbers. And I'm going to talk about all that all at once. So here we go. I understand that Brian Flores is the defensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings, and he has some influence on what the Vikings do with some of those picks. But you got to think about it like this: the defensive side of the ball lost the most during this whole offseason. The Vikings cut Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, two guys that they're signed in last offseason to be starters and mainstays, on this team for years to come. And that didn't happen because their production was piss poor. Now, that's just the defensive tackles. And then you look at the linebackers are aging. Blake Cashman is in his last year, with the Minnesota Vikings. And I think Eric Wilson is already 32 years old. So you need to get younger at the linebacker position. So let's talk about the safeties. Harrison Smith has not announced his official retirement yet. So you don't know what's happening there. And the only safety that can actually play on the field that we've seen with some kind of production was Josh Metellus. And we can talk about if he's a fit going forward with this team, a little bit later. But that's the safeties. And then now you go to the corners. They actually only have 3 corners on his roster that have actually really showed they can play meaningful NFL snaps. Now, with that alone, that will make you think that the Vikings should go into the draft and kind of revamp and retool through, the draft, right? But look at this. The Vikings are currently spending 160 million allocated to the offense, and the defense is only about 102 million. So I'm going to say it again. The reason why this draft was so heavy on the defense is a couple of factors. I believe this draft was a good draft for defensive players going forward, but the Vikings needed the most help on the defensive side of the ball going forward. Now, if you look at the offense probably only needs basically a what, number 3 receiver, young, explosive running back, a center to bring in, some kind of competition with Blake Brandell, and that's about it. After that, you're basically going to, get guys that are going to be developing in the background, or guys that are just practice squad players or special teams. So the defense was the need this offseason. And when we talk about it as this was Brian Flores' draft, we got to give Rob Brzezinski a little bit more credit because I got to call it like this. Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, and I don't want this to happen. Let's say some of these draft picks on defense don't pan out. The first thing some of y'all out there are going to say is, damn, Brzezinski fucked up the draft picks. So let's not talk about this is Brian Flores' draft right now when if something goes, the wrong way, y'all going to be blaming the GM. If the GM is going to get, well, my bad, interim GM, y'all going to blame the interim GM. The GM gets all the blame when things go wrong with this team, and not all the praise when things go right. So, but let's get back on the topic a little bit more. But I do believe that the overall direction that the Vikings took through this draft makes a lot of sense, especially down the road. I mean, I've already talked about the defense losing multiple starters and needing to get younger at key positions. But what I admired the most with this draft was it feels like the Vikings actually had a thorough plan going into the draft. And even though I understand that some of the players they could have targeted, at certain picks probably weren't there, but they still got a lot of value throughout the whole draft. And then some people think that Caleb Banks is a stretch. I mean, we talked about that in my last video. I don't necessarily think so. I mean, he has the body type, to be dominant in this league. It's just the injury concerns, that he has right now. But you got to think those injury concerns could be a blessing for the Vikings in disguise, because if he was 100% healthy and played majority of his collegiate, last collegiate year last year, then he probably wouldn't have failed to 18 with the Minnesota Vikings. He probably would have been a top 10 pick in this draft. So that's going to be interesting to see how Caleb Banks pan out. But you have all these other, players that were drafted. You got Jake Golday, linebacker from Cincinnati. You got Dominic Orange from Iowa State. I mean, Jacoby Thomas from Miami. So I can see this defense getting revamped and getting, a jolt of athleticism, energy, and youth. And I'm all for it, because this is something that I've been talking about so much through this whole offseason about the Vikings getting younger at multiple positions. And I can't complain right now. And I'm just waiting to see how things actually pan out with this draft. But with the narrative, I just think we have to just call it, for what it is. So when you actually look at the full picture, a lot of these takes and a lot of these positions make a whole lot of sense. So I gotta dive into this right now, because this is just something that's been on my brain for a little bit. Let's talk about the media and fan accountability. Now, I understand like my stance, and for me being in the podcast world, and my whole thing about Skull State of Mind podcast being a football podcast, and my whole demeanor on how I, talk about things, and how I stand on what I believe in. And if I have, different information coming in, differently, it can kind of like sway my opinion and stuff like that. I've been real open about that. But I just feel like what makes it hard, for content creators like me, is you have an abundance of fans, media, and other content creators out there where like there's lack of accountability, right? And when I'm saying lack of accountability, it's like the wavering of opinions, is kind of hard, because it's like you have people that follow multiple channels and multiple people, and they depend on us to get their content and to get their news, and especially get our opinions. And it's kind of hard when there's multiple people, especially people that are at the top of this whole podcast thing, that have wavering opinion and switching narratives. And I just want to, give you guys, everybody who follow my channel, that's not what we do here. You get what I'm saying? Like I have my beliefs, I stand on it, I move forward with it. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If I'm right, I'm right. And if I, have to change, a stance or whatever, I don't mind getting on here and saying like, yo, this is the reason why I feel a little bit different about this certain, topic or whatever. I just want to give you guys that, because what's been bothering me about this thing, and this is kind of like I don't want to be like have a blanket statement on it, but it's the Will Fries situation, right? Like I just remember, the whole offseason last season, it's like a lot of people out there was like, up in arms and clamoring, and hey, Vikings need to sign Will Fries. They gotta sign Will Fries. I mean, he was projected to be the top offensive guard, in free agency. And the Vikings did figure something out and actually sign him. And Will Fries last year was subpar. And my whole thing with the Will Fries signing is that you basically got the same production that you was normally getting from Ed Ingram. You got in Will Fries. You just got it at a older person clip, and you got it at a more expensive contract. And I just think that people forget how they were rallying for that, and it hasn't actually panned out. But then you go ahead and you blame the general manager at the time and say, oh, he made this bad, free agency signing. But that's kind of what all you guys, well, majority of you guys wanted. And that's just what I'm going on with like the accountability situation. It's like, especially in like the Viking community, people get on Twitter and they say a lot of things, and hey, we want this, we want that. And that thing actually happens and it doesn't pan out. And then it's like, oh, that person made a mistake. But that's what you wanted. So you got to kind of hold that. So I know that's neither here or there, but I just thought that was just something I needed to talk about, and I needed to express myself, because I just see a lot of it right now, and it gets kind of it makes the news and a lot of things like kind of muggy going forward. But let's get into this right here. Let's get into the general manager search. All right, let's talk about leadership, right? Off top, I really like what Brzezinski did in the draft. I really like the direction that Brzezinski has been leading the Vikings to, but we're not sure if Rob Brzezinski either wants this general manager job or is he just, you know, being the interim general manager to make this Vikings team more attractive to somebody in the future. And here's what I mean about it making the general manager spot more attractive to somebody else. So, as of right now, the Vikings are not in salary cap hell. They just had a great, draft, you know, last week. They have multiple pillars on this, offense and defense now going forward. But that wasn't the case when the offseason started. When the offseason started, the Vikings were over the cap. I mean, they didn't know what they were going to do with Justin Jefferson's contract or, with Christian Darrisaw's contract. And I'm not going to say that everything is, peaches and cream right now, but I do believe that Rob Brzezinski has done things to make this team, a lot better on paper and this team being more attractive to GMs in the future. And I'm just saying, I'm not sure if Rob wants the job. I mean, if he takes the job, I'm for it. I'm gonna get behind him. I believe he's been in the building for over 28 years, so he's kind of seen the ins and outs. He's seen a lot of coaches. He sees the ups. He sees the downs. So hey, he might be the perfect person for the job. But the Vikings did hire a firm to kind of help them out with this general manager search. Now, I'm not sure of in depth of what that firm does, and you have to take what you get from them from a grain of salt because ultimately it comes down to what the Vikings trust want to do with this team. That's like, you know, big players, executives like Brzezinski. That's the owners and a couple of other people that have this small group that's actually making these decisions for the Vikings going forward. So even if this firm, shoves out, say, hey, you should try to interview this candidate. This candidate might be, the right person for the job. We still have to take that in a grain of salt because it's going to come down to what the Vikings organization wants to do going forward when they hire a general manager. Now, when we talk about a general manager position, I'm going to give you my perspective on how I feel about that. I don't want anybody that has ties to Kevin O'Connell before he came to the Vikings. Now, I understand him and Rob already have their relationship right now, and it is what it is. But what I'm talking about it is I don't want McKay from the Rams to come here because I feel like when you try to pacify your coach and you want to give your coach a general manager that basically he has approval over, it's going to be hard for that general manager to make decisions on that coach. And what I say by that is that let's say the Vikings have a bad year next year. We all don't want that to happen. I'm just hypothetically speaking. It would be harder for a coach that has a pre-existing relationship with Kevin O'Connell to, hey, this might not be the right thing for Kevin O'Connell. Maybe we should move on. Maybe we should promote Brian Flores. I just feel like the Vikings, in their best interest, is to find somebody on the outside that has been able to be in the front office for multiple seasons and somebody that actually has built, you know, great teams in this league. And I just feel like what we do have to understand too, if a new general manager is hired, and even if that is Rob Brzezinski, it's going to take time to actually completely right this ship. We still have questions at quarterback. We don't know what's going to happen with Brian O'Neill in his contract. Is he going to get an extension? We don't know if Christian Darrisaw is actually going to come and be, healthy for a whole year. So even with all that being said, there's still obstacles a general manager coming in will have to, have to get over once they become the general manager. So I'm just saying, as a Viking fan, and my perspective is, hey, we got to be patient with this. I mean, we might have a couple of guys that we want to get this job, but that guy might not be a person that the Minnesota Vikings organization is not looking to. We just got to be open for it. And it's going to be a lot of names thrown into the situation. And it could happen to where it's a situation where where it's like we didn't even know who Quasi was at the time, but he came in here and did a few good things and it didn't work out for the long term and we're moving on. But I still am happy about the overall direction that the Vikings are going through Rob Brzezinski. And if I could say anybody, I would say I want the job right now. I would say we could just give it to Rob. But let's keep it moving. Let's talk about potential free agents. So I know all y'all out there have, heard the news and, the Minnesota Vikings brought in Jauan Jennings, from the San Francisco 49ers from a workout and a talker contract, you know, with the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I don't know if you heard me about this before. I'm I'm kind of I'm on the fence with the whole wide receiver three position. I really believe in promoting within, and I believe in developing guys that's on your roster. But I do understand the stance with Jennings coming here and giving the Vikings some kind of insurance going forward because, excuse me, you don't know what's going to happen with Jordan Addison. What if he gets suspended? He could do anything, right? That's always to happen. And then you have to think about injuries too. So what if something happens to Justin Jefferson? What if something happens to Jordan Addison? Or anybody else on the roster? And I think Jennings has showed that he can be a wide receiver two or wide receiver three in this league consistently. That he's done with the San Francisco 49ers. I'm not sure what kind of contract he's looking for. I mean, my projection is something to where it's like $9 million guaranteed and a lot of escalators and incentives that he can make throughout the year. But I understand it. I really understand it. It's a real big insurance factor. So like I'm open to it, but that doesn't really like like falter much on Ty Felton going forward because I think that puts Ty Felton in a better position because if you bring in someone like Jennings, he won't have so much pressure to be that wide receiver three. And just like I talked about before on a couple of other people's podcasts, the wide receiver three position, if you look at the target share, I think Justin Jefferson had about 141 targets. Jordan Addison, with all the games he played, missing 3 games, he had like 68 targets, and the wide receiver three only had I think like 50 something targets because the actual pass catcher three, and that's just something we got to start saying, like pass catcher three, the actual third option on the team outside of Addison and outside of Jefferson is actually TJ Hawkinson. And I know a lot of people out there have their concerns about TJ Hawkinson. It is what it is. But if you actually go back and look at the target share, he gets the third most of the target share going forward. And that's crazy because he missed like a couple of games, at the end of the season. But just like I said earlier, I'm open to it. Whatever the Vikings have to do to actually make this team better going forward and get some kind of insurance, especially, with injuries, like I get it. I get it. Like I'm not even I can't even hold you on it because it is what it is. I mean, there are other guys out there. I can't really bring up too many names. I really am not interested in a DeAndre Hopkins situation. I think he's kind of over the hill right now. And I mean, I'm not saying that he can't do it and that he won't come at a good price. I just really don't want anybody that has other ties to Kyler Murray. Like we're not building a team for Kyler Murray. We want to build the best Viking team. And I think Jauan Jennings actually does that for the Minnesota Vikings. But the one thing I can say before I close this video out, it's kind of interesting that a lot of the free agents that the Minnesota Vikings have signed in this Kevin O'Connell tenure either comes from 3 teams: the Los Angeles Rams under Sean McVay, the San Francisco 49ers under Kyle Shanahan, and the Green Bay Packers with Matt LaFleur. That's just interesting to me. I mean, that's another video for later when I dive into, what's really going on with Kevin O'Connell's offense. But that's all I got for y'all, man. I just thought I would just get in here and give you guys my perspective on, the draft narrative, some things I've been seeing in the media and, just dive a little bit into, what this free agency, post draft is going to look like. I do believe that the Vikings will sign somebody. They will sign multiple pieces going forward. I just hope they bring in maybe a veteran center to kind of compete with the centers that's already on the roster. And I still think they need to bring in maybe a corner and another safety in free agency for competition, purposes also. But it's interesting. I mean, we're going to see what happens. As of right now, I think rookie mini camp is probably scheduled for next week. We've already saw, the veterans come in and, do a couple of things. So it is what it is, man. I'm just interested, and it just feels like this offseason is about to commence, and we about to get to training camp. So off top, I gotta thank everybody, for tuning in. Had to get in here and get this video, but that's it. Let's go.